Season 8 of Death Battle's come and gone, and while I've almost finished preparing for my remastered rankings of seasons 2 through 7, for now I'm going to go through Death Battle's most recent season while it's still fresh in everyone's minds, assuming it doesn't take ages for me to make this, but who knows. This season had a lot of good episodes, with only a few misses here and there. But which are the good ones that I like the best, and which are the misses that I like the least? I've done reviews on all of these episodes before, but for the purposes of this video, you don't need to have seen those. They're just there if you want to hear my more in-depth, if slightly outdated takes. Let's start at the bottom and work our way up to the episode I totally haven't already said is a contender for my favourite episode of the show. I've said nothing of the sort, I'll have you find.
No, the Satsui no Hado
actually shows many symptoms of
I still don't like Akuma vs Shao Kahn at all. Well, the animation anyway. The analysis is actually fairly solid, with Akuma's in particular being really enjoyable and covering plenty of crossovers and other various Street Fighter media that makes this stand out a lot more compared to other rundowns for the series. And Kahn's is fine, as little interest as I have in this character, with MK11 making him look rancid. It's noticeably shorter than Akuma's, I don't find it as fun, but I still had an alright time with it. I appreciate that it isn't as repetitive as a lot of other Mortal Kombat rundowns. Cabal's bullet deflecting and Raiden's temple destruction are nowhere to be seen, and even Test Your Might is left out, thank god. The one thing it has over Akuma's analysis is that I like the cutaway unironically instead of it being carried by how unbelievably cursed it is. The fight on the other hand, what the fuck, man. I want to believe this was intended for the in-house team, but because of the departure of Tori and David and Christina, their main 3D animators, they didn't have the time or resources to get it done, and the sprite team was already stretched thin between Dio Card and Mad Horizon. So they had to give it to the Blender team as an unfortunate victim of circumstances. That might not be it, but then I can't think of particularly many reasons why they would have gotten this fight based on their previous track record. This team has shown that they excel at sword fighting, expressive facial animations, and fights with lots of weapons and abilities to throw back and forth, while they struggle more with pure martial arts. So anyway, they got given another fight that was almost all pure martial arts, with one character who has one primary emotion and one who wears a mask. Yeah, this one seemed doomed from the get-go, though to their credit, this is still a big step up from Batgirl vs Spider-Gwen. There are some pretty decent shots here and there and some nice effects. Though for every one good combo string, there are a handful of shots that look really bad. Sometimes they'll look frustratingly awkward or slow, and it'll ruin an otherwise good concept like Khan turning Akuma's combo into his own and then doing the X-ray, or the atrocious looking Shoryuken. And sometimes it'll look fucking hilarious, like Akuma getting yonked across the desert and Oni throwing out all these Go Hadokens. For every decent looking effect, like both uses of the Raging Demon or Oni's eyes in the smoke, you'll have something that looks really shit, like this purple smoke green screen or Khan's untextured flat green shield. I think in terms of effects, this one might actually be a step down from Batgwen. That's not the only downgrade on the visuals though, the models here are mostly really bad. Base Akuma looks amazing, his Shin Akuma hair looks wonky, and Oni has completely different proportions to both of his previous forms, and it's really distracting. Then there's ranted MK11 Shao Kahn, whose design I think I might actually like less than the DBX Thor model. Instead of an area like the Batcave where there are things to interact with and mildly interesting things you could do with different areas, this takes place in some boring desert with nothing around it. There are some small pillars, cool. I mean, the animation isn't a failure in every way. Like I said, there are some occasionally cool shots and effects, and I think Philip Sacramento's performance as Akuma is amazing. But when you have all this jank to fuck martial arts, a performance for Khan that doesn't fit him very well at all, some of the worst character models they have ever used with some really unintentionally funny expressions, Akuma getting bodied all fight, mastering the Satsui no Hado and then succumbing to it within 20 seconds, and then Khan walking off an injury he previously had to spend ages recovering from with help, and then one of the limpest, weakest, yet funniest deaths in the show. What am I supposed to get out of this one? Akuma occasionally getting a really cool line or solid combo can only carry the episode so far. This being the mess that it was disappoints me even further considering how close we were to going a whole season without a single episode being really bad. I mean, there were others I didn't care for, but this is the only one I find actively terrible for a lot of it. The others I didn't like were closer to just being kinda average, maybe even a little below. Speaking of which,
Also, Nem's debate is twice as long! He must have 4 times the hearing!
Blake vs Mikasa sure is an episode. It's far from Death Battle's worst, but I don't have much reason to ever go back to it, and I'm more than a little disappointed that this was the only outing for the in-house 3D team this year. Blake's analysis is surprisingly fairly decent. For a character I find as boring as Blake, they managed to go over her story fairly well, and even throw in a handful of jokes that I thought were alright, including a cutaway which I liked well enough. Then you go over to Mikasa, and fucking hell, this is probably my least favourite individual rundown of the season. It's like Blake's in the sense that a lot of the jokes left me stone-faced, but instead of me liking those rare exceptions here and there, we get stuff like Boomstick making erection jokes, several fart jokes including the worst cutaway of the season, and the majority of the episode's how do you do fellow kids talk. This did nothing to make me want to check out Attack on Titan, especially since the sidebars spoil the big twist that, oh yeah, huge spoilers for Attack on Titan by the way. They just outright spoil that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield show up in season 4, like come on man, what the fuck? That really wasn't necessary to spoil, but to their credit, they at least put a spoiler warning at the start, so that's one thing this has over Dio vs Alucard, I guess. The fight is faring way better than Mika's analysis, but still isn't something I call particularly good. The main issue is the thing that everyone's already brought up before, the inconsistent frame rate. Blake and Mika's bodies are animated on 2s while everything else is animated on 1s, except sometimes their bodies will also be animated on 1s, because why not? I get the stylistic choice they were going for, but I do not think it translates into 3D particularly well. And it looks distracting when the characters themselves change frame rates mid-shot and are moving at different frame rates compared to the camera and their own hair. There are some really dynamic shots of the fight, like them fighting while swinging, Mikasa cutting off Blake's arm, and the two of them fighting while upside down next to each other. But for every cool thing like that, we have an unintentionally hilarious shot like Mikasa doing the funny run, her appearing behind Blake, or the bit at the end where she tries to take away Blake's bending from a distance and fails miserably while giving us the funniest death scream we have probably ever had. Writing's a mixed bag too. Blake doesn't get to shine a whole lot because they couldn't get her VA for some reason, and while Mikasa had it better getting to analyse the situation and use strategy, almost being the main character in a way, there are lines like 4 times the hearing, which why? Francesca Kahlo delivers the line well at least, but it does not change the line itself being really fucking dumb. The beginning and end of the animation with Blake ignoring an overly aggressive Mikasa, and then being super happy when she's lost an arm, her aura's broken, and she's about to get mauled by a titan are more than a little jarring. The best thing this episode gave us is the track, which is a banger, but I would much rather listen to it on its own because the battle doesn't do it any justice. The episode isn't terrible by any means or even that bad. I'd still give it a 4 out of 10, but it is a very high 4. There are a lot of things I do like that are bogged down by an equal amount of individual things I dislike, with further overarching issues dropping it just below a 5. Still, I am happy this episode happened. It made Your Only Mate happy, and it's his favourite episode from what I hear. And this was his dream match, so the episode did exactly what it needed to, really. Now do the same for Nemesis with Destroyer vs Iris, cowards.
Oh fuck, he has diplomatic immunity, never mind, he's won.
Lex Luthor vs Dr. Doom is fine enough. I can't say I enjoyed it, but I can also say I didn't actively dislike it, so it could be worse, I guess. The analysis was a snooze fest to me, Doom's especially. Returners tend to not have repeat analyses that stick with me, and this is no different. They have a few things like them taking up the mantles of iconic heroes, and specifically with Lex, they went into way more things with his personality traits and such that they didn't already with his first episode. Doom's on the other hand brings up more or less everything I remember from his first episode, and not much to set it apart, aside from him becoming Iron Man for a time. The one big plus the analysis has going for it is the editing, which is just fucking stellar, man, holy shit. I can look past the annoying sound effects because my god, this is one of the best looking analyses we have ever gotten. My favourite part is when they're building up Doom's power. This series of comic panels gradually builds up in sync with the music and it's so cool. Too bad the jokes aren't equally as good as the editing because beyond one solid visual gag and a callback to Ben vs Hal, I don't like any of the jokes here. They range from leaving me stone-faced to leaving me in agony at these awful-ass cutaway gags. So then the fight is also fine. I like Lex's vocal performance by Gianni Matrogano. Can't say the same for Stephen Kelly's Dr. Doom, which is a shame because I quite liked his previous performances as Dracula and Obi-Wan. The dialogue's what ultimately sinks us for me though. There are some parts I like. Lex calls Doom a knuckle-dragging buffoon, which is funny. The Superman line is concise, which is appreciated given the rest of their monologues. And Doom's line during the body swap is alright. The rest of it is boring exposition where they stop the action completely to explain what we can already see them doing, which leads to this animation being a slog where it feels like nothing happens. Is it in character? Maybe. Doesn't mean I find it interesting at all. Tony vs Lex already gave us great dialogue with Lex. I wish we could have gotten more of the two egomaniacs talking down to the other while they press their advantage rather than providing a constant running narration. Like, imagine if during Lex's first episode where he starts charging the satellite laser, instead of giving a speech about how Tony isn't fit to play God but he is, he instead started hyping up the satellite laser itself. That would suck, and that's what most of the dialogue in this episode is. Maybe if the limited action we got was stand out in any way, I'd be fine with it, and it gets pretty solid towards the end. though everything up until then is pretty lacking. The gunfight at the start is boring, they have a melee scuffle with Doom's staff, which is whatever. The 2D grid is cool but amounts to nothing. The time hub bomb's about as effective as normal teleportation. The foot dive combo, okay, that one's pretty good. Lex being trapped by rocks is dumb, and Doom being taken aback by him fixing his suit is even dumber. But then fairly soon after that we get the Superman line and the Injustice reference, which I like that part. The body swap is creative and basically exactly what I was hoping for, and the kill itself is pretty good with some fantastic expression work and a neat reference to that one comic panel. And then Doom gets a really shit line after blowing up the resources he came there to steal, but don't worry, it's epic. I can see the appeal this episode has, I'm glad people like it, it's just not for me. It doesn't stand out as an episode on its own or even compared to other Marvel vs DC fights. It is definitely an episode that exists, and I probably won't think about it very much after I move on to this next segment.
Yeah, Shadow was gonna lose, sooner or later.
The winner is Shadow the Hedgehog.
Shadow vs. Rico is an episode I don't quite like as much as I once did, but not to the point where I don't still like it at all. This is still an episode I quite like, way more than the three I just covered. I didn't particularly care for the analysis, it was solid enough but none of the jokes were hitting me or anything, and I really could have done without the Boomstick's dad joke and Wiz talking about menstruation, but I enjoyed hearing about the character stories well enough. As much as I still like Shadow vs. Vegeta, Shadow did feel deserving of a more modern coverage. The fight's pretty good too. It does have its issues, primarily with Ryuko. Her rigging is a step up from what Season 7 sprite fights had, but her facial expressions were decidedly not that. And there's the issue of her being characterized as her early series self rather than after she'd gone through her big character arc, which kinda sucks. I would have loved to see more interactions between her and Senketsu where they're actually written properly. Older episodes like Snake vs. Sam, Tony vs. Lex, Ratchet and Clank vs. Jack and Daxter, and even Dante vs. Bayonetta have pairs of characters that are able to talk to each other like familiar friends, and they're able to actively aid each other in combat. Here Senketsu has 4 lines, half of which Ryuko claps back at for some reason, and the other half she just ignores. Shadow, on the other hand, is done fairly well. He mainly keeps to himself, gives one-word answers, and while his Chaos Blast at the end sounds more bored than anything, I do appreciate the intention of Tranquil Fury. Brendan Blaber does a mostly pretty good job with his lines. As the Jenny Yokobori and Tom Laughlin as Ryuko and Senketsu respectively, I have probably butchered both of these names, I am so sorry. The action's pretty solid all throughout. I like that Riko's constantly adapting to whatever new shit Shadow throws at her. She digs into the ground to stop the tornado from carrying her away, she pushes her advantage and gets faster when she realizes how fast Shadow is, and when Shadow activates his super form, she stops fucking around and does the same, which unfortunately didn't get to be hand-drawn like what the storyboards intended. There are some really cool shots like the Chaos Control neck kick and the Super Shadow transformation. Everything to do with the alumni mode Scissor Blades is stunning, and I like the general sense of speed the animation has, even if the sound design doesn't sell the impact of their clashes at all. There are a lot of points where the sound effects feel off here, but in these rapid clash shots especially, it feels pulled straight from Zero vs. Metal Sonic. There are thankfully some solid jokes as well to make up for the lack of those in the analysis. I like the bit with Shadow pulling out his gun, and his favorite line's both a reference to Sonic Adventure and his previous death battle with Vegeta. It's not the best part of the fight that I'd call the episode Season 8 shot, that'd probably be the reveal of the alumni mode Scissors, but it is my favourite and it always puts a smile on my face whenever I rewatch the fight. Unfortunately, I don't think the fight ends too well. I like the build-up which references Kill la Kill's final episodes. Beyond that is a lame vaporization death where Shadow sounds really bored, and Ryuko shows no concern for Senketsu. It's not awful, but it doesn't do much for me. And yeah, that's Shadow vs. Ryuko. I didn't have as much to say on it this time around. In any other season this would probably place higher, but the competition here is steep enough to where this doesn't stand out compared to the rest of the season.
Wait, Korra didn't win?
I am shocked at how well Korra vs. Storm came out. It's no masterpiece by any means, but considering the Avatar Curse on Death battle and how the match itself feels like a Season 7 filler leftover, it is a miracle that I like it as much as I do. This is easily the episode I've been the most pleasantly surprised with all season. Korra's analysis is fine enough with some wonky pacing at the start and a really lame overarching joke until its payoff at the end, and a cutaway that I could probably show my month-old cousin and he'd guess the punchline halfway through, but a fairly strong ending to make up for things, and the pacing not being nearly as bad as Goku Black or Steven's analyses. Yes, it feels like they're doing the opposite extreme of Zuko vs. Todoroki by dumping too many calcs on us, but at least we get some story stuff and a name drop for Korra before it devolves into versus nonsense. And it gets brought up alongside her powers, which makes sense, I guess. Storm's analysis, on the other hand, is a fucking banger if you ignore the weird clips they play from the live-action version of that one Zootopia scene in the Charlie Day Luigi sitcom. It checks all the boxes I could want with good coverage of her story and personality alongside her powers, good jokes, and fantastic editing. People say she was downplayed, which isn't true. They did the scaling for her behind the scenes, but they decided that since it wasn't necessary, they would go over what she herself did that could only be brought up in this episode, rather than going into unnecessary scaling that would continue to be brought up in many future episodes. I really like how Storm's analysis turned out, easily my favourite overall part of the episode. Not that the fight is weak by any means, it's fun enough, but nothing overly special. It's not got particularly great choreography, as Storm barely gets to use any of her powers, they never work in the claustrophobia or anything, and Korra kicks her ass all fight, only getting hit twice before Storm turns it around and instantly kills her. But I'm not as bothered by this, I guess, because Storm is still able to hold her own, and there are enough positives to outweigh this for me. I think the battle looks incredible. Korra's custom sprites are great, Storm's Marvel vs. Capcom 2 sprites have the white outfit, which I don't think looks as cool as her usual black costume, but whatever, it works fine enough. The real stars of the show here though are the backgrounds and effects, which are some of the best the season has to offer. All of the bending and weather manipulation looks stunning, and these highly detailed backgrounds somehow not clashing with the 2D sprites is really impressive. I like how the Spirit Realm looks, enough to look past how they never explained the portals verbally, so whoops. Plus there's plenty of great hand-drawn shots, which do vary a bit in their style, but not enough to where I'm actively bothered by it. On the audio side of things, Amanda Julia Gonzalez and Shara Kirby have pretty solid performances as Korra and Storm respectively, but the track is easily what stands out most to me here. Weathering the Elements is one of my favourite tracks of the season, sounding intense, cinematic, and generally really nice to listen to. This episode didn't stack up to the last two sprite fights in many ways, but I think this is one of them. It sounds amazing. Oh, also, before I wrap this segment up, I realise I haven't actually addressed the Nemesis cameo beyond haha, it's the funny Ragna Kiru man in the Ghost Realm, which, unironically, this is one of my favourite things in the episode. Seeing that one of my close friends has made such a big impact on the community to the point where the Death Battle team knows about him and respects him enough to have his avatar cameo in an episode is really cool. Now hopefully next season they take the next step and do his most wanted episode, Do Destroyer vs Iris Cowards. And yeah, there's not much else to say with this one. Analysis was good, fight looks great, sounds great, the jokes all landed for me, even the Cabbage Guy one, which felt like the perfect way to wrap the trilogy up, upping how far out of his way he goes to not get his stand destroyed each time. And the death is pretty good. It's nothing special, but I did like it quite a bit.
The art of magic is a perplexing thing. Only those with the right knowledge, talent, and willpower can truly claim to be the most powerful wizards of all.
Like Batman, the genius crime fighter from DC Comics.
Unlike Genos vs. War Machine, Batman vs. Iron Man came out at a time when I couldn't take MCU clips seriously because now I just associate the actor with the memes surrounding him, and it led to me getting so much ironic enjoyment out of the Iron Man analysis. Not that it needed to be carried by that, because this episode's analysis is pretty good in terms of feeling distinct from Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor. I found a lot of the jokes funny, the cutaway started good even if the punchline was dire docs. Gerardo killed it with the editing, and the way they handled Tony's story with the Heart of Gold line at the end, that's good stuff. Batman's was fine as well, but it started quite shit, and whenever they weren't going over new stuff I was half asleep listening to the same stuff they'd already gone over 3 times already. I think the context of these two both being returners shot the animation in the foot more than the analysis though. If you absolutely have to bring Batman back for a 4th time, then I would hope you would have done something with him that takes advantage of the fact that you now have voice acting for him and get to play more into his character, not just giving him a single suit that turns him into the most basic bitch of bare bones Herald in terms of moveset. The Hellbat's cool, but not something I care to watch for an entire animation over Batman getting to use more of his gadgets that his 2nd and 3rd appearances didn't deliver on in any way. Maybe if he at least got to be Tony's equal in the brains department I'd be fine with it, but nah. He gets one smart bit at the start, then once he goes into the Hellbat he destroys the thing he started the fight to protect, doesn't at any point notice Tony hacking him, or even the entire Iron Man suit's worth of nanometal Tony snuck onto him, and he's completely helpless when Tony stops him in place. Tony's thankfully handled a lot better. He doesn't get any of the more interesting armors, but he does get the House Party Protocol, Godbuster, Soul's Hammer, and the Hologram armor, even if he doesn't do anything with the latter. So I found the episode a bit underwhelming compared to what it could have been. Still, I've heard a lot of people call this Diet Lex vs. Doom, which, yeah, no, I don't agree with that at all. I may have been more disappointed by this episode, but I enjoyed it way more in spite of that, because there was a lot of good stuff here. More than good enough to outweigh my problems. The animation is very well done, outside of a few weird facial expressions and weirdly angled sprites at the start. Special note to the neck crack, which looks so fucking good, man. The action, as bare bones as it is compared to what we could have gotten, is still very fun. I like Bruce having to outmaneuver Tony at the start, then the Hellbat completely overwhelming an entire army of Iron Man suits, which finally gives us a different dynamic to Batman's other fights. In those ones he was the weaker one and had to keep his distance. The House Party Protocol versus Hellbat scene is great, and for as much as I wish the Godbuster didn't get bodied since it's meant to be the Hellbat's equal, the brief clash with the beam struggle and the fucking awesome bust this shot are great. The banter's on point mostly, with Tony being the more talkative one while Batman's more concise and deadpan. I like the I am exchange, even if I wish Tony said something to prompt Batman saying his line. The 3D backgrounds and effects look incredible, especially Soul's hammer. There are a bunch of small details like Tony being shown early on to be hacking the Hellbat, and references to previous Batman death battles like the J-pop and the car slam that show an obvious care and love for the character's legacy on the show. And I really like the concept behind the ending where they're both out of their armors and have to settle it hand to hand. But Tony has one less trick up his sleeve, which is ultimately what gets him the win. So yeah, as disappointing as this episode was for not being all it could have been, I still really liked it. It's a good episode, just not one that particularly stands out as one of the best of the season, or even one of the better Marvel vs. DC fights.
How are you gonna change this into the Dragon Warrior? Huh?
I don't know.
Steven vs. Star's an episode I wish I liked more. I like it a lot, don't get me wrong, but for a match I was this excited for, it's a shame that I can't put it any higher on the list than here. I think that's partly down to the analysis. I can't really say this does much for me. It's got weird pacing issues like the whole thing with Steven's cult getting dropped before his own name, Star's universal power being discussed before she blew up a building, a lack of jokes I liked outside of the cursed cutaways, and some of Ben and Chad's line deliveries sounding off. I don't know how to describe it, but it seems like they might have had to record on an off day. I don't know, man, I just can't say I click with this analysis as much as others this season. It's not the same slog to get through as the character neglecting Danny vs. Jake from last year, but it doesn't bleed the same passion as stuff like Poe vs. Iron Fist or Heihachi vs. Geese either. The fight though, the fight's really good. Doesn't have much I'd call amazing outside of the Pink Steven transformation, which is fantastic, but almost everything else about it is good. Save for that one hand-to-hand shot on the bridge, the weak death, and a lot of the lip flap animations. This animation captures the exact kind of fun I would expect from it. It doesn't have the most insane over-the-top action, but it didn't need that at all. All it needed to do was use a good number of their abilities and have fun banter, both of which I think they pulled off well. The Sandcastles line in particular stands out as my favourite, that's great. The voice actresses they get for both really help sell the dialogue. Caden Jensen has Steven's mannerisms down so well, and Megami captures the exact kind of bubbly and over-the-top energy I would expect from a character like Star. I'm impressed how well they were able to handle the tonal shift between the mostly silly and cartoony first half, to the second half where Steven loses himself and turns into his pink state and is now out for blood as their small armies fight and the music takes a far more intense turn. I think it went far enough without going into the full-on mental breakdown kaiju Steven, which, in retrospect, yeah, I'm really glad they didn't do that, because that's not something you can rush, and I don't think a short animation would have been able to pull it off well. I don't know what else I can say about this one really. It's fun, it has a lot of good scenes, the sprites and voice acting are on point, I like this episode quite a bit. I was never sure how the episodes I gave a 7 out of 10 this season were going to be ordered initially, but this is the only one where I knew from the get-go that it would not rank last out of the 5, even though it didn't end up being my favourite of that bunch on a rewatch. If the analysis clicked with me to the same extent as the animation, I could have easily given this an 8, but what can you do?
Did someone say thirsty?
You said it, my guy.
If you asked me at the start of 2021, what do you think would be the least fun time to be associated with the Death Battle community based on how they responded to the episode, and laid out the entire season list in front of me, then I would have immediately gone for something like Madara vs. Aizen or Dio vs. Alucard. Surely it can't be one of the fun, goofy matches that I'm looking forward to that would generate a response that bad. Turns out, no. Of all matches, it was Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man. It's not something I want to spend too much time on because I'd already said my piece on it back in its dedicated review, but I feel it's still worth addressing that people some fucking how use this episode as a means to paint the Death Battle team as monsters for killing a fictional persona of a real person, even reaching as far as to say the kill having anything to do with an area of his body near his heart is a spiteful reference to how Randy Poffo died of a heart attack, even though they go out of their way to treat Randy with nothing but respect and have next to no gore in how he dies, even bringing him back to life afterwards while implying that he and the Kool-Aid Man do this shit all the time. Seeing people so desperately try to take the moral high ground over something as stupid as this made me embarrassed to be part of the community, and I really hope people don't pull shit like this again. Thankfully, I at least like the episode when separated from all that controversy, though I would probably call this the biggest disappointment of the season for me. The focus on Boomstick's dad and having that segment all be animated clearly took a lot of budget away from the rest of the episode, giving us one of our shortest episodes since the first 2 seasons, only matched in that regard by Ken vs. Terry. I don't actively dislike a lot of the animated host stuff except for the Star and Deadpool showing up. but I also could not care less about this plotline based around a joke I have not found funny in ages. It's made even dumber by how Boomstick is calling Randy his dad all episode, and Randy at no point says that he isn't until he dies, so what's even the point then? If this focus took away from a generic cape shit episode or something, then I wouldn't care, but with how unique this matchup is and how we're unlikely to get any characters quite like them again, it lets me down that they bring these characters in and then barely do anything with them. You know what bothers me most about the lack of focus on the fight people are there to see though? When it does focus on Randy versus Kool-Aid Man, it's fucking fantastic. If we got a full episode out of this, then I could so easily picture this being a masterpiece that could probably crack the top 5, even when the competition is as steep as it is this season. I dig the analysis and its unique sense of structure. Wiz and Boomstick even start arguing and continue the analysis somewhat during the fight scene without actively taking away from any big scenes. That's pretty cool. And for as short as the fight is, it's so good. The art style's bright and vibrant and I love it, the voice acting's top notch, their creation of Adam reference is amazing, I like the unique ways they use some of Kool-Aid Man's powers, and the entire segment in the Kool-Aid dimension was stellar. I really hope they do a full episode in this claymation style. Then the ending's also really creative, it makes use of Kool-Aid Man's unique toolkit and biology so well. It's a pretty well done fake out, which actually got me given the community's consensus that Macho Man was gonna win. There isn't really anything about the fight I dislike other than its boatloads of missed potential, and I guess this explosion looking way too small in this shot. Other than that, I don't really have any complaints. This episode definitely isn't going to be for everyone, and it's fine if you don't like it as long as you're not one of those chuckle fucks who's trying to paint the team as actual villains. I really like it, in spite of how short it is and how little it gives me to talk about. And even though the Boomstick's dad storyline doesn't work for me, I think it's neat that they used their special 150th episode to further flesh out their own cast of characters. Given how much time, effort, and budget went into a passion project like this, it sucks that it had to perform so poorly. It's the only episode of the show so far to not reach 1 million views, so honestly, I'd recommend checking this one out or rewatching it over most others this season solely off of that. Please, for the love of God, let Rooster Teeth's takeaway from this be that short episodes don't do too well, instead of it being that people don't want to see more fun and out-of-the-box matches.
Not even a corpse, not even a Cloud Strife face plant.
Link vs. Cloud is my favourite of the remaster, remake, rematch, whatever batch of episodes that Death Battle has done. I see a lot of people calling this their favourite of the season, at least in the first half, and some even going as far as to call this one of their favourite episodes ever. It's nowhere near that level for me, but I still love it. I expected not to like the analysis very much because I didn't remember it too well and I'd heard people call it far from the best the season had to offer, but I actually quite enjoyed Cloud's rundown. It had some solid jokes, I liked the cutaway, they actually have story stuff going on. Pacing at the start's really weird, but I'll live. It's nowhere near the worst analysis pacing the season has. Link's analysis though, man, it is boring. It's the episode's weakest link, no pun intended. I like the cutaway. The rest is just versus stuff and Link's arsenal of weaponry with borderline nothing about his story. The only bit of that is at the start and they speedrun through it in a few sentences. I know Link is somewhat of a blank slate, but I'd imagine cutscenes throughout the series give him more to work with than this. I appreciate that they do their best to cover all of his relevant weapons, but at the same time, when you can only include so many in the fight, why bring up so many that you don't have the time or budget to use? I'm not saying they should only mention what they plan to use in the fight, and they didn't need to include more than they did in the animation because what they used was plenty, but some of this stuff was definitely replaceable with more of a deep dive into Link's overarching story across multiple timelines. The animation then. It's the first battle the SFM team did since switching to Blender, and I think it turned out great. It's the only one of the team's episodes I wouldn't consider an outstanding masterpiece or an insulting failure, and I think that's kinda what they needed. A somewhat middle ground between the two that finally shows us they can make a banger episode that doesn't need to live up to the impossible standards set by their other fights. Unless you do consider this one of their best fights, in which case, well, that sounds like a you problem. The battles comprise of 3 main acts, and the first of which isn't too great. The motorcycle battle's pretty cool, but then we get the awful looking ancient arrow, and Cloud's faceplant, which is nowhere near as legendary as the one in his original Season 1 episode. And it goes on for fucking ever. I know it's a reference to the Breath of the Wild physics engine or whatever, but I don't care, it dragged on for way too long. The second act is much better, giving us more direct swordplay between the two and some funny scenes with Link breaking some pots and the two stopping each other in time. And once we get into the 4 sword stuff, the episode really starts to shine. The dual wheel fusion sword Cloud versus 4 swords Link is really cool in spite of the camera not showing us all the action in this long shot here, but I don't care because after we get 4 Links each using a different piece of their arsenal to set Cloud up for one of the others to land another hit, and it's so cool. They gave each Link a different and distinct personality as well, I like that. Cloud drops a black hole, Link uses his cloak to retreat and his ocarina to change the weather, and this is where we get to the final act of the fight, for sure my favourite part. Cloud is able to redirect the Skyward Strike back at Link, even temporarily killing him, and he heals up thinking he's won. But Link gets revived and we get this fucking outstanding Fierce Deity transformation as Link erupts from the rubble and towers over Cloud. For a while I was bothered that Fierce Deity kinda got bodied, but now it doesn't bother me as much. He is still pressuring Cloud into being on the back foot for the last part of their fight. He does still manage to push Cloud around, who instead of hitting back actually sets up the Omni Slash and avoids Link until he can use his fire materia to land the one hit he needs to send Link into the final onslaught. This on top of the purple fire looking amazing and setting a great atmosphere for the whole scene, and this incredible shot of Cloud in front of the moon, man I love this ending. I love the whole episode. It's flawed for sure, but I don't care. This is a banger and I can for sure see why this is a highlight of the season for so many people.
I never thought it would happen. A serious fight.
I love it!
I saw some people commenting on how satisfying it was to see Nem finally have an episode he could score higher than me this season, which, yeah, I agree, that doesn't happen too often, and I was happy to see it. The episode being Madara vs Aizen as well just feels right. I don't have too much investment in this match for these characters, but I was excited to see what they could deliver on with the episode so many people were excited for, and in the end, it turned out pretty well. Despite a rocky start to the animation which gave us a preview that worried me a lot, the animation quickly picks up after Madara's headbutt on Aizen. The rest of it after that is a borderline perfectly escalating fight where they each continue to ascend into higher forms and one up the other, finally being on even footing in their last clash, resulting in a solid fake out that actually got me on my first viewing. I know people say that the music still going makes it obvious that it's a fake out, but I don't know, it sounds to me like it could have been about to end. And even then, my first viewing was in a call where I couldn't hear the music that well anyway. Not that I needed to though, because Hollow Dreams is such a banger that I had listened to it 10 times before the episode dropped. It's that good. I think other tracks this season definitely felt more tailored to the progression of the fight and complementing whatever's happening on screen, while this one feels like a song on its own that just so happens to be able to sync up to some stuff. Like, I think the instrumental bit with the Limbo clones versus the Hado 99 is the only bit where I can definitely tell that the track changed to fit with the battle. But I don't even care, man. When the track is this good to the extent that I can re-listen to it endlessly, I don't care that it's not directly responsible for any of the fight's standout shots, which, by the way, it has in spades. Stuff like the long shot of the Limbo clones versus the Hado 99, Madara's following speech, Aizen slashing apart all the wooden cuboids in the distance, the initial summoning of the perfect Susanoo, Aizen's fake out kill on Madara. There are plenty of fucking amazing shots, including one I didn't even pick up on before. See, this right here is Madara summoning the Ten Tails, which I didn't know about, which means his solution to Aizen's black coffin was to let himself get trapped in it for the sole purpose of breaking out in his strongest form so he wouldn't have to stop and enter it later. That's fucking awesome. What follows it though with his casual summoning of the meteor, that is my favourite part of the fight. It is on par with He-Man vs Lion-O's Mountain Toss. It has got so much impact and I love it. The voice acting is also some of the best this season. Nicholas Andrew Louis does great as Madara, and Philip Sacramento kills it as Aizen, with his final line in particular having a level of venom I wished Alucard's choke on your own line had in his episode. I love the analysis as well, outside of the quirky Chair Sama cutaway and all of Boomstick's various how do you do fellow kids lines. It's got good coverage of the character's story and personalities, good jokes, and even my favourite cutaway of the season. If there's anything to bring this one down, it's again the fairly weak start to the fight, with Aizen's puppet rig in particular not looking too great thanks to how his outfit works, plus the lack of setup. The death is fairly underwhelming even if I love the following shot of Madara looking on at the falling meteors, and there were some interactions and sequences from the storyboards I wish they could have added. This is another case of budget and time clearly holding an episode back, because the storyboards indicate this was meant to be like a 5-minute long fight, with even more amazing lines that I'm so disappointed never made it in, and even an entire segment of the fight that had to be cut entirely. Those could have been the turning point to me bumping this up to a 9 out of 10, but as it is, it's still a high 8 that I love a lot. Not as much as Nem did though. Still, the fact that he was able to enjoy it as much as he did, that makes me happy.
I predicted that like a year ago.
Heihachi vs Geese is a criminally underrated episode, and one that I've only enjoyed more and more since its release. I've seen the criticism thrown around that it should have been a 3D fight, which I don't think is fair to say. Well, if you're saying that because you think 3D fits a Tekken episode better, then that's fair enough. But there are people who think this would have been inherently better off as a 3D battle, which kinda devalues the sprite team, and that kinda bums me out. If we were talking about a Torian fight on the same tier as Ryu vs Jin, then sure. But if anything, this season's mixed output for their 3D fight should show that this style is isn't always going to be better. And on its own merits, I think this episode slaps. It's obviously not in the same jaw-dropping tier as something like Ryu vs Jin, but it didn't need to be. The fight's super short and simple, but also super fun, portraying Heihachi's aggressive rushdowns and Geese's heavier focus on counters and projectiles quite well. It's got some shit bits like Heihachi throwing the rock and minor logistical errors like how Heihachi somehow escapes the volcano with no ledges in sight for him to grab onto in time, but honestly there's not much in this fight I can say I dislike. The action starts slow, picks up in the middle, and then fittingly slows down a little towards the end as the old geezers are really tired since it's 4 PM and that's when they usually sleep so they can get up in time for their early bird special. And we get a stellar ending where they both chuck each other in the volcano they were fighting on and Heihachi wins through his sheer bullheaded stubbornness, making sure to prioritize Geese's death over his own survival. Does the hand-drawn Geese look slightly off? Sure. Does it suck that it cuts from before the lava hits to after without showing the initial impact? Kinda. Do I care? Not really. It's a stellar ending to a great fight. The rest of the animation has plenty of standout stuff as well. The predictable joke landed for me every time it was brought up and I liked Heihachi turning it on Geese's head. Geese smacking Heihachi in the cock was funny. The Raging Storm had a ton of impact and that rotating shot is still stunningly good for reasons I still cannot explain. Even the opening to this fight's great, working in Ringmaster in a not annoying way and recreating Geese's intro. Touches like that go a long way to show how much they care for these characters. Much like with John Talbane vs Saberwolf last year, the passion for old school fighting games is clear as day. I mean, they even have Geese speak in broken English like how he does in the old games, that's pretty neat. Brent Mackay did a good job with the performance, and even though Yoshi Yamawa's Heihachi isn't everyone's cup of tea, I think it's cool that they got a Japanese VA for him. The best thing in the episode though is for sure the track. Kings of Iron is so fun and catchy, I love it. It sounds right out of an old school fighting game, if only it wasn't so short. I thought the fight would have to carry, but surprisingly the analysis holds up as a banger. It didn't make me laugh or anything, but the jokes had me smiling when they weren't the two boomsticks dad jokes or the god-awful nearly minute-long Elon Musk tangent. My interest in these characters helped things a lot. I was interested to learn about them, and the ending to Heihachi's rundown in particular got me interested in checking out Tekken. Maybe someday. Overall, this episode slaps and deserves way more praise than I've seen for it. I get that it won't stand out as much when such universally beloved episodes like Link vs Cloud, Goku Black vs Reverse Flash, Dio vs Alucard, and Saitama vs Popeye followed it this season, but come on man, it's still fun, and I think people sleep on it way too much.
FNAF at Freddy's, that's where I wanna go. FNAF at Freddy's, underneath the mistletoe, yeah.
I am still in shock that this episode even happened. Poe vs Iron Fist gave us our first animated film character after almost 150 episodes. And even better for me, it just so happened to be one of my favourite characters from one of my favourite film series of all time. So it makes sense that everything to do with Poe is what sticks out to me the most over Iron Fist being yet another Marvel character. That's not to say his side of the episode was bad. The team clearly put a lot of care and love into his side of things and they didn't favour one side at all like what the community did. He gets to do a lot in the fight and his analysis is pretty good. Editing stellar, they got me mildly interested in checking out some of his storylines. They never take potshots at the Netflix show and opt to just not show footage of it instead. And for the handful of jokes that didn't work for me, there were plenty more that did. It doesn't hold a candle to Poe's rundown though, which is one of my favourites Death Battle has ever done. The jokes were all landing for me and the editing was amazing in spite of Nick not having any comic panels to work with. But beyond all that, hearing them go over Poe's story and the events in his series, it struck a chord with me in a way so few episodes do. Hearing them name drop all these characters and seeing their names in the sidebars just made me so giddy. And that feeling's persisted even through multiple rewatches. Even the royalty-free music they use, which isn't something I usually notice, adds so much to the tone of the ending of the analysis. It's fantastic. The fight's a banger as well, in spite of a few incredibly minor issues like some facial expressions and rigging that look off for Iron Fist at the start, a few awkwardly animated shots and like a singular line that sounds off. I don't even care, this fight's so fun. It starts off as a friendly sparring match with just hand-to-hand combat before they start using chi techniques. Then they get serious, which leads to the amazing bamboo staff fight, which does a great job showing Poe's creative fighting style. And then the flawless whooshy fingerhold scene, which leaves me with the dumbest grin on my face every time. The animation isn't full of super high-octane action, but is more so focused on good character interactions, comedy, and how their various abilities counter each other, which I think works. And whenever we do get general martial arts combat, I think it's pulled off well, with Poe especially getting some great bits of creative choreography that fit him perfectly. His dialogue's also spot on, with Austin Lee Matthews being a borderline perfect fit for the role. Everything up until the spirit realm's amazing, and then after they both get transported there, they take it to the next level. Danny gets to hold his own in spite of being blinded and lands the most impactful hit of the fight. Poe gets one of his iconic lines as he summons the Chi Dragon, and then the music and visuals really kick themselves into high gear as they incorporate more melodies from the Kung Fu Panda series as the two Chi Dragons fight, with some of the nicest looking hand-drawn stuff in the series. Sans Danny also looks great. God, the ending to the fight's so good. Until the death, which is my one big issue with the fight that isn't small enough for me to brush aside and not dampen my opinion of the episode at all. In this storyboard, we get this cool shot of Iron Fist throwing a punch, and Poe flying into him while also being posed like he's smashing through Danny with all his might. The actual episode has Danny not get to throw that last punch, and Poe just kind of flies through him like he's making his daily commute. And both of them have that last scene where Poe is overjoyed about murdering a dude that I don't like. For as right as they get him for the rest of the animation, they really missed out on being able to show off his serious side towards the end by having him bow to Danny and show how much he respected him or something like that. Instead, we get a quirky line that takes me out of the ending entirely, but hey, at least they name dropped the goated Master Shifu. The ending isn't enough to keep this from being one of my favourites of the season, but it does drop it below a 10 out of 10, and stops me from being able to call it one of my favourites ever. When the rest of the episode makes me this happy though, one bad scene's not going to be the deal breaker. Is it any surprise to anyone that Goku Black vs Reverse Flash is this high up? This is one of the most common picks I see for people's favourite of the season, and it's no wonder as to why. This episode is a masterpiece, and it has one of the most fun fight scenes Death Battle has ever had. Everything about this animation comes together to make something special. The speed is conveyed insanely well, which is key for a Flash episode, just as Goku Black's destructive power is something that's key to get right for him, which they also do. Side note, but in my original review for this episode, I thought this creator was Thawne landing back down and bouncing off the ground, but no, he got launched through the earth again from the other side, so that's my bad there. What's really at the core of this episode though is the personalities of the characters. Goku Black's god complex and Thawne's sheer pettiness. Both of these are conveyed incredibly well, with Zamasu gloating every chance he gets, while Thawne will go out of his way to fuck around with him or even just mess with some civilians, he's not picky. The expression work and S-tier voice acting helps this immensely, especially the latter. Valentine Stokes' Reverse Flash is one of the best casting decisions they have ever made, given he was the one to spawn the big "it was me" Barry meme. The amount of character put into everything these two do helps sell all the great jokes in the animation, like them not knowing the others immune to time paradoxes, as well as all the great action, which is so much fun. It starts great with them fighting normally, but when they start traveling through time and killing each other over and over, even going back to Flash vs Quicksilver, it becomes one of the season's highlights that draws me in every time I go back to it, and it has me smiling the entire time. There is so little I dislike about this fight. Really, my only issue is Zamasu missing all these ki blasts while Thawne isn't even moving at the start. The only other downsides to me aren't even really downsides. They're just elements I don't think stand out compared to other episodes like the hand-drawn segments. But when I only dislike one minor part of the animation while loving the rest, how could I not place this one so high? Especially when the episode hits highs as high as it does with its stellar characterization, amazing selling of speed and the impact of every attack, the great track, which I don't know why people wanted Yates' other one instead because this one's a banger, and one of the best kills we have ever gotten where Goku Black gets to the entire front of his body rug burned off, still alive as he hasn't reverted to base form yet, before his mangled remains get tossed into the sun and cause a supernova. Holy shit, I love this episode. I didn't know at first why this one clicked with being the way it did. Well, I knew why, I just didn't know how to word it. But with Nem's review, he talked about how this is the one episode of the season that didn't feel burdened by budget or time constraints in the slightest at the time, which, yeah, I think that's it. This feels like a work of passion, evident by how the researchers have publicly said this was a last-minute addition to the season done not out of requests, but because it was one they really wanted to do. And it shows, even down to minor details they never needed to add in the fight but did anyway. Episodes rarely ever bleed this much passion, but when they do, it's always welcomed. So you may be wondering, if I can gush over an episode this much, why is it down at number 4? Well, I think a lot of you will know where this one's going. The analysis drags this one down a bit. Not Thawne's, that one's stellar outside of the Flash Gordon thing at the start. It's funny, well edited, I like the ending a lot, it's so well done. Goku Black's, on the other hand, isn't. It has some of the worst pacing I've ever seen in a Versus show, with that scaling tangent dumped right at the start, with a few solid jokes here and there, but an equal amount that made me tempted to skip it outright. They also bring up Murder Zamasu feats without ever clarifying he wasn't being included. Sure, why not? I like the ending, it's well edited, and I chuckled at the Yamcha and colorblind jokes. The rest of it was either drop dead boring or actively aggravating. I think the only individual character rundown I dislike more this season is Mikasa's, but at least that one wasn't ruining an episode I would have otherwise probably had in my top 10 of all time. Goku Black's rundown unfortunately stops me from giving this episode a 10 out of 10, but it's still an absurdly high 9. And the fact that it got as high as it did despite me actively disliking about a quarter of the episode should tell you all you need to know.
The fact that Alucard dies from a decapitation, and this removes his head.
Sprite death battles hardly ever get as good as Dio vs Alucard. The irony of me not caring about the episode at all upon its announcement, only for it to become one of my favourites ever, is not lost on me. This was Liam's dream episode for so long, and you can tell from how the script turned out for the animation and the analysis. The fight is top notch in almost every way. It has its minor issues here and there, like some Ataka's deliveries as Alucard sounding a little off, the frame rate for the hand-drawn shot of Dio accompanying the world cry, and now missing all of these bullets for some reason even though they call attention in the analysis to his marksman ability. But honestly, I don't care. All of this episode's shortcomings are either insanely minor, not even things I think are issues, or are completely cancelled out by how good the rest of the scene is. Am I really going to be bothered by the frame rate in this shot when what's happening alongside it is one of the best line deliveries Death Battle's ever had? I guess there's also the lighting in this shot, but I have to assume that's an intentional stylistic thing because JoJo's, right? The rest of it is fucking phenomenal, easily one of the best sprite fights Death Battle has ever done. If you've seen any of the standalone reviews and MRI have done this season, you might have heard us bring up the term Season 8 shot, which is the season's trend of every single episode, regardless of quality, having that one standout shot or scene. Even if they weren't my favourite parts of each battle, they were still the moments I would vividly remember and think, wow, that was fucking awesome. Stuff like Ryuko's alumni mode Scissor Blades, the rotating shot in Geese vs Heihachi, Link's transformation into Fierce Deity, so on. I don't think Dio vs Alucard has one of those because the entire animation is full of Season 8 shots. Alucard's level 1 transformation and the same imagery being used for Dio at the end, the Road Roller, the Blood River, the real fucking vampire line, the Big Ben clock hand fight, the World Cry, the final stand rush. How do you pick just one when the entire animation is on that insane level of quality? The choreography is so well done, especially on Alucard's end. Not only do his movements tell how terrifying he is, but his fighting style of letting himself get hit until his opponent gets tired is shown off by how he never dodges a single attack. And you get the sense that Dio, as much as he tries to hide it, is terrified of him. Even the world gets a brief shot where it's taken aback by the Blood River. Dio isn't given the short end of the stick though. He gets to use more or less all of his abilities that don't straight up take over Alucard's mind and stop him from being able to fight. He gets to drink blood, shoot the space thing of Rippy Eyes, freeze Alucard's arms, all without having to sacrifice his stand and time stop. The banter is top notch. Despite 2 weak deliveries from Taka, he delivers every other line as well as I would hope. And Tom Schalk gives one of the best performances in all of Death Battle as Dio. Every line read is pulled off perfectly, and it helps that all the dialogue is memorable. There's only a few jokes at the start, while the rest of it later on focuses on showing off their less comedic personalities, which I think works. The fight goes for a very specific tone, and I don't think them constantly cracking jokes would have helped that. I think the track definitely helps the fight set atmosphere as effectively as it does. It'll change intensity for the situation, giving stuff like the Road Roller and both of their final lines a lot more weight to them. I don't listen to it on its own too often, but it's still great. Looking at Goku Black vs Reverse Flash and comparing it to this, I think I might actually prefer the former when looking at just the fight scenes. Not by leaps and bounds or anything, but it's got peaks to match this episode with even fewer issues. Why do I have this one ranked higher then? Well, Goku Black vs Reverse Flash had one stellar analysis and one really shit one. Dio vs Alucard have 2 fucking phenomenal analyses that are on Reverse Flash's level, if not even greater. I can't really think of any jokes in either that stood out as bad. The editing's top notch as is to be expected. I like the cutaways both ironically and unironically. The JoJo memes aren't as unfunny or intrusive as Jotaro vs Kenshiro. In fact, I thought they added to this one by making it seem more like a passion project, and also they show the context for them all on screen. Their stories and powers are gone over in an interesting way, and I think out of every Death Battle analysis they have ever done, Alucard's has my favourite ending. The way they work in a quote from Hellsing, the name of the series, and even tying it into Dio's rejection of his humanity without explicitly calling attention to it, that's so fucking well written, I love it. I think the fact that I am yet to see any detractors for the episode that dislike it for any reason other than the results, with even the people complaining that Dio should have lost giving them the props that the animation was fucking awesome, should be a good sign of how well done this episode is. It's one of the season's fan favourites, and for damn good reason. What was it I said back in the summer? That I was still in awe at how well Yoda vs King Mickey worked for me even after however many months it had to sink in? Well, it's however many months after that, and yeah, that still holds up. I still go back to this fight scene all the time, though it'd been a while since I went through the analysis, and I was really happy to see that it still held up. There were a handful of bad jokes, mainly in Yoda's analysis, including a cutaway that goes on for too long and has nothing to do with the actual episode, and Mickey's segment is noticeably shorter, which is a shame, but those shortcomings aren't nearly enough to stop this from being one of my favourites in recent Death Battle, far better than anything Season 7 had to offer. The love for these two characters in the analysis is palpable, even for the classic cartoon incarnation of Mickey which wasn't being used. They reference the key gag from his newer show, they play clips from various other Mickey media, they call back to Fantasia, and they even get to play the Sorcerer's Apprentice theme because that's public domain now. And while the cutaway in Yoda's analysis was painful, the one in Mickey's is one of my favourites. It starts like it's going to be just another lol give themselves feats cutaway, but then they caught me by surprise on my first viewing by having it actually be funny, thank God. I also love how both rundowns flow, talking about the origins of their groups because they themselves don't have much backstory to go over, then going into their various weapons and abilities, their versus applicable stuff, and concluding it with the endings to their stories. How Mickey helped seal away the darkness, how Yoda trained the figure that would go on to inspire a whole new generation of Jedi, and both of them getting some of the best end clips in this series. The love for the characters in the series bleeds into the fight scene as well. This is some of the best characterization in any Death Battle and manages to expertly avoid all the potential pitfalls they could have fallen into. I was worried this would be a prequel meme fest like Obi-Wan vs Kakashi, which I liked there, but I didn't think would fit here. I was worried they were going to write Mickey like a game theory-inspired Darkly sketch where he's an evil capitalist overlord because haha, funny corruption of innocence. Hell, I was worried Yoda was going to be written like a caricature as well because of all the ketamine addict memes and the likes. Plus, the Lego death scream seemed like a shoo-in for the kill. But no, they characterized these two incredibly well. They both come across as respectful to the other, with Mickey even getting some playful jabs and Yoda getting to throw in some words of wisdom. Even small differences in their dialect, like Yoda calling the fight a duel while Mickey calls it a tussle, helps to add to my immersion in what's going on. And while the choreography is fairly basic for the most part, I don't think that's a detriment at all. Mickey only really has light magic and a few other things he doesn't get to use like the time stop and healing, neither of which I'm too bothered about not showing up. Mickey's never fatally wounded, so it makes sense for him to not heal up, especially when he's on his last legs as to not run out of magic. And stops are not being used means Yoda gets to react to his incoming death, which I think was necessary. The effects for Mickey's attacks all look great, the voice acting by Philip Sacramento and Kirsten Howard is probably the best overall of the season. Their attempts at comedy all work for me. I like that they both try to disarm the other but bring their weapons back to them. I like the dynamic tracking shots of Yoda's lightsabers being launched away. It's all great. Not flawless of course, but all the issues I have in the fight are super minor, most of which I only notice because of how many times I've rewatched this fight. You know what, I'll just rattle through those real quick so I can take after the episode and end this segment on a high note. This shot here is confusing and looks kinda bad. There's some minor nitpicky shot inconsistencies like the pillar halves moving here but then being still in the next shot. Mickey's here when Yoda starts to push him back but then is all the way on the other side of the arena in the next shot. Mickey starts running here and for some reason takes ages to get across the stage. And sometimes the clouds will clip in front of Yoda's lightsaber. Now most of these might sound like nitpicks, and that's because they are. None of these absurdly small issues take away anything for me, except that one weird shot I still don't get at all. If anything, the fact that I noticed as many small things as I did should be a testament to how much I love this fight, since I've watched it enough times to pick up on things even that small. So anyway, back to talking about the good parts of the episode, which is all of it, so I should probably narrow it down. So back to talking about the ending. I love the bit where Yoda tosses his lightsaber aside to focus exclusively on force combat. It makes sense both in universe given Yoda's preferred fighting style and his own self-appointed code, but also makes sense in the context of the fight that Yoda would see the sword fighting as pointless, given that neither have actually landed a hit with their blades. Mickey had landed all of his hits through his light magic, and Yoda had fittingly only landed counterattacks with the force and a few whacks with his cane, which he picked up with the force. This is also a case of actual character development taking place within the animation, which, massive props to the writing team, that's not something we get too terribly often. And then we get Yoda firing Mickey's magic back at him in reference to Mickey showed him with some guy whose name I don't know in Kingdom Hearts 3. A fucking stunning scene in pretty much every way, with my single favourite dialogue interaction in all of Death Battle. There are individual lines I like more, but in terms of a back and forth between the characters, yeah, this is the best one in my eyes. Funny how well the recent Star Wars Death Battles have worked out for me, because I wanted Obi-Wan to talk only in prequel quotes and I got it, and I wanted Yoda to drop his most iconic line, which, again, I got it. I expected it to be an offhanded thing that would be kind of cool in the moment but then I'd forget about immediately after, but no, they went the extra mile and built up to it fucking flawlessly with a great line from Mickey preceding it, and more of their signature amazing facial expression work in spite of limitations with his character model. and I think overall this is the best integration of a character's iconic line they've ever done, which includes my second favourite shot in Snake vs. Sam, my favourite episode of all time. I can't think of much higher praise than that. And then everything that follows it, Mickey taking Yoda's advice and giving his last attack his all, Yoda coming to terms with his loss and peacefully accepting his death, the fact that they managed to make Mickey Mouse screaming a genuinely climactic and intense moment, the funny little bit after with Ghost Yoda, fuck man, this is incredible to an extent so few episodes are. It's all elevated to the next level by the phenomenal track. Hearts of Light is a banger for most of it, but when we get to the ending, which takes cues from Simple and Clean from the Kingdom Hearts soundtrack, man, it's so good. It perfectly captures the operatic sound of the Star Wars prequels and the magic of Disney. Mate, it gives emotional weight to the results segment, so you can only imagine how much it adds to the ending of the fight for me. I really can't sing this episode's praises enough. I'm gutted that this was the one episode that my friends and I didn't record our initial reactions to, because watching it alongside them was one of the highlights of all of Death Battle for me. Nothing else this season got as much of an audible reaction out of me as this episode did. It's my favourite season premiere by a long shot, and I expected it to stay on top of this list as well. I mean, how couldn't it? To even come close to how much I love this episode is a rarity for this show, so how could they even hope to try and top it? Well, like the funny green man says, it's not a matter of trying, they either do or do not. And, well... Yeah, this really wasn't a difficult decision at all. As good as the rest of the season's been, nothing else manages to come close to how happy Saitama vs. Popeye makes me. The analysis is one of my favourites of all time, with stellar editing, good coverage of the characters, and plenty of jokes I laughed at, with basically none I disliked. Closest they get is the cutaway in Saitama's segment being kind of nothing, but I'm still happy it's short because that means more of the episode's budget gets to go to the outstanding fight scene. I think one of Season 8's greatest strengths is how amazing the animation teams managed to make the 2D characters look on 3D backgrounds. Shadow vs. Ryuko was solid enough in that regard, but every sprite fight from Lex vs. Doom onwards was visually fantastic, and this one keeps that trend going despite not even being a sprite fight. Kinda. Each and every shot in the hand-drawn segments of the fight looks amazing, with the action being fluid and every hit having the right amount of impact. And the way the characters' faces are drawn are so expressive. Not that Saitama's emoting particularly much until the end, but you can always tell how seriously he's taking things, putting in more and more effort as the fight goes on, which leads to it being really well paced. There's also plenty of great bits of character animation, with Saitama mostly showing with his body language that he isn't really giving it his all up until after the sprite segment, and Popeye getting to do a lot more cartoony shit to set himself apart from Saitama's more grounded self. He stretches out when he gets pelted in the face, he fixes the wall he launches Saitama through, and when Saitama destroys the planet by jumping off it, Popeye jumps off the sun and sends it tumbling away through space. The voice acting is on point, with Liam's Popeye being mostly pretty good outside of one weird line read towards the end, and Ryan Abedi knocks it out of the park with Saitama, though I'll come back to that in a bit. And of course there are the changes in animation styles. I don't think the sprite or 3D segments are as good as the hand-drawn stuff because those ones have a lot more memorable moments for me, but it's not like these segments aren't also really fun with their own standout bits, like Popeye's gear third punch as he says his catchphrase, and the death and spinach punches exchange. So the episode's incredible, but what ultimately sells it as a top tier episode of the show for me is the ending. I said with plenty other episodes in this video that they show a ton of care and passion for the characters involved, and this one's no different. The ending to the animation has a scene for both of them that perfectly fits them. After Saitama's death, Popeye gets a recreation of his theme to fit the context of Saitama getting turned into eggs, and it's funny, I like it. But Saitama's is ultimately what steals the show. He'd shown in the 3D segment that he was really getting into the fight, but this bit here where he gets to stop and have a chance to take it all in, realizing that Popeye's the one to finally push him to having fun again, it hits different, man. Even if there was no dialogue, I think the music and top tier expression work would have sold exactly what he was thinking. But they go the extra mile and give us one of my favourite lines in the show. I'd mentioned the voice acting before, and this is where I think Saitama's fully shines. All fight he'd been getting his usual monotone nonchalant voice across quite well, and now at the end he finally gets to show that joy in his voice. The excitement of finally finding an opponent he can go all out against. I think what impresses me about this even more than with Yoda vs King Mickey is that those two had precedent for how they would act in canon. Saitama doesn't for this context, outside of I guess the dream sequence in the first episode of One Punch Man. Saitama's never put in a real situation where he'd get to act like he does here, but they make it seem believable and in character despite that. And for my favourite fictional character to get this kind of treatment, it makes me so happy. This has basically everything going for it that a bunch of my other favourite episodes do. to. It's got hand-drawn animation that I think looks even better than Jack vs. Afro. It's got a godlike ending carried by the characters' personalities and an exciting final clash with great music to match Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor, and it even has that extra level of personal connection with me that matches Meta vs. Carolina. Not just because of Saitama being used, but because I got to watch it with friends, sharing the experience with people who love the episode as much as I do, giving me the best first impression of a death battle I've ever had. I still prefer Snake vs. Sam by a hair, but other than that, I have no qualms calling this my favourite death battle ever made. It's like it was tailor-made for my friends and I to all love it, which thankfully we all did. And if we're lucky, maybe something in Season 9 will be able to come along and match it. And if we're even luckier, that match will be Black Adam vs. Apocalypse Marvel Comics X-Men. So that was Season 8 of Death Battle. After Season 7 was a step down from the last two before it, I'm glad to see they turned it around and delivered one of their best ever. In fact, I'd call this outright my favourite season of the show. It did falter in a few areas. Boomstick has a lot of dialogue that sounds like they're trying too hard to be hip and trendy, and most episodes feel restricted to an extent by budget and time restrictions, which isn't something that stuck out too much in previous seasons. Sometimes short scenes or even entire portions of the battle had to be cut, which you can see in the storyboards that are on the Artist DeviantArt page. But for every step back, the season takes 10 more forward, with some of the highest overall levels of quality for the season's episodes of any season of the show, and so many memorable passion projects that blatantly show the care and love put into every aspect of them. Plus, they fix a lot of the big issues people had with Season 7. There's less cape shit, the sprite rigging's been improved by so much it's like night and day, and the analyses all have a much greater focus on story than most Season 7 episodes. Seasons 2 and 6 are the other big competitors for my favourite of all time, with both having amazing high points they're able to hit pretty consistently for me, with them being the only two seasons where I'd give more than half the episodes an 8 out of 10 or higher, though both of those have a caveat. For as consistently as Season 6 put out episodes I loved, it was also hitting the lowest high points other than Season 7 for me, and while Season 2 had the high quantity of bangers and the most amount of episodes in my top 10, including my previous top 2, it also has about a quarter of the season being actively bad, so that's not great. Season 8 has the best of both worlds. It's got the consistent bangers they both have, it's got peaks to match Season 2, and it's got way fewer misses proportional to Season 2. It has more episodes I don't like than Season 6, with 3 of those compared to Season 6 only really having Aang vs. Ed as their one big miss. But even then, I only consider Akuma vs. Khan outright really bad, so they're basically equal in that regard. The tipping point for me though was that as good as Seasons 2 and 6 were, I experienced them almost completely on my own, only getting to talk to a few people about them and usually just having to keep stuff to myself. But with this season, it's the first one where I got to watch almost every single episode in a group. Even some episodes that I couldn't make it to the initial viewing for with my friends, they were still down to rewatch them with me. I think the only ones I first watched completely on my own were Blake vs. Mikasa, Batman vs. Iron Man, and Korra vs. Storm. Everything else I got to watch with my friends, even if I wasn't there for the initial viewing that we made the reaction highlight reels out of. Even with episodes I didn't like as much, it meant my first watch of them was still one I enjoyed, and episodes like Poe vs. Iron Fist, Yoda vs. Mickey, and Saitama vs. Popeye being some of our unanimous favourites have given me memories and experiences with this show that I'll never forget. So that's a wrap on this. Hopefully you enjoyed this overly long ranking, and the individual reviews if you've seen those as well. Thanks to you all for watching and giving me an audience to ramble about my decade-long hyperfixation to. Thanks to my friends for supporting me over this last year and putting up with me. And thank you to the Death Battle team for giving us a season as good as this one. Hopefully Season 9 can up the ante even further. Oh yeah, now I'm apparently on the Death Battle team's radar, which that's not fucking terrifying. Liam got Nemesis to DM me Leroy Jenkins, what the fuck is even going on anymore?